we're sitting down at the closing table 2 years from now, it's going to be a lender's choice here. You know, they're going to have the final say in this. So again, the buyer's going to want to talk to his lender and say, here's what I'm thinking about doing. I'm going to pay the seller, you know, $3,000, and he says he's going to apply it back towards the purchase price at closing. Is that okay? Because the last thing you want is a surprise at the closing table when the bank says, no, you can't do that. And then you've got $3,000 that's gone. And if the buyer defaults, this is the money that the seller just gets to keep. It's just, he's already got it, so it doesn't get back. This isn't, and again, this is not earnest money. Rent, how much is the rent going to be a month? And what, if any, portion of that rent is going to be credited against the purchase price? I mean, most of the reason, you know, a lot of the reasons people like doing these purchases is they say, the buyer, I'm talking from the buyer's perspective here, is, you know, it's great, I've got this place, I can pay $1,200 a month, and $200 a month of that is going to be applied towards the purchase price of closing 2 years down the road. So that's something you need to talk to your client about and negotiate that out. It's not required. You know, I've seen it where zero gets credited. You know, it's just a straight rent for the amount of the term. But most of them have this where a portion is going to be going back towards the purchase price. Again, it's a lender's call at the end of the day. So make sure that you're, if you're representing the buyer, that you tell the buyer to check with his lender, his potential lender. Make sure that's going to be kosher at the end of the day there to apply that to the purchase price. Let's see here. Commissions. This is the most important thing for you guys, right? If I said something else was the most important, I was wrong. This is it right here. This is it. When I first started doing these, everybody was so optimistic. Everybody was, oh, you know, we'll do this lease purchase, we'll get paid at closing. It's a year down the road. I was the same way. You know, I didn't take a fee. Hey, I'll draft it, I'll just tack it onto the HUD. You know, a year down the road, I just got to make a note in my file. They don't close. These things have really low closing rates. So you want to try to get paid something up front. And it's really important. I mean, you guys don't get paid enough anyway on a straight purchase. Let alone these where you're spinning your wheels and working overtime and working hard to get these things done, and it's a year or two down the road. The two ways I've seen it and two ways I've drafted it is a portion of the percentage of the commissions up front, and then the remaining at the closing. So if you're getting 3%, 1.5% up front when you sign these documents, 1.5% at the closing table. Another easier way to do it is just to say an amount equal to the first full month's rent, or a portion of that rent is what I'm going to get paid to bring this deal together here. But it's really difficult. It's going to be really difficult if you're a listing agent and you're talking to your seller who's going to be open to a lease purchase. You need to have this discussion up front. And if you come to an agreement, get it in writing, because it's going to be really difficult to convince a seller to pay you something that hasn't closed yet. And you just got to be really, really, really on point with that and make sure you've got everything in writing and everything documented. And then when I drafted it, you know, it'll obviously be drafted into my agreement too that everybody's going to sign. So that covers you a little bit, but you got to have it up front. Let's see here. Obligations during the term of the lease for the tenant. I'm not going to run through all of these, but these are the ones that are in any standard lease. You know, the tenant can't have a meth lab on the property, obviously. You know, there's no unlawful use of the premises. They got to use it for residential purposes only. Can't be running a business out of there. Keep premises clean, plumbing fixtures working, facilities, keep the yard clean, safe, etc. Dispose of the garbage, pay the utilities, don't destroy the property deliberately. You got to allow the landlord on there. The landlord's got to get on there and make a repair or something like that. There's plenty of these. If you want more, you can email me and I'll shoot you the list I have. The landlord's obligations in a term of lease. You want to make sure the landlord's complying with the business or the building and housing codes, and that they're going to cooperate with the tenant for all repairs. One thing I put in here, which is kind of I put it in here, it's kind of laughable, is you want to make sure the landlord's making all their mortgage payments. You can put that in there all you want, but you can't really force somebody to make the payments. The one thing I had a suggestion is proposed to me was, well, why don't you just write it in there that the tenant has the option to request that proof that the mortgage payments have been made, and that's a great idea. And I don't know how you would do that, whether it's a clear check, or if it's a statement from the internet or from his bank account or something with the numbers marked out or something that says that proof of payment, that he's staying current with his mortgage. And I'll talk about what happens if he's foreclosed on here in a second. You also want to make sure the landlord's going to use any sort of insurance proceeds to fix any property that might have been destroyed. Let's see here. Tenant default. What happens if the tenant doesn't perform under the lease? This is what I think a lot of sellers don't understand, is that in a lease purchase, they're going to be a landlord. They might not like it, but they're going to be a landlord. There's no way around it. This is a lease. And so if the tenant, I had one the other week, I had a call on a lease purchase I drafted, that the tenant just stopped making payments. So, Frazier, what do? You drafted this thing, what does the landlord do? Well, the landlord can't go and take all the property out, personal property, throw it on the yard, change the locks, put a for sale sign back in the yard. Can't do that. You'll get in a lot of trouble. So the landlord has to go through the summary ejectment process here in North Carolina. And I have represented landlords down in small claims court, and it is horrible. It takes, it could take 45 plus days to get someone out of the property from the first time you send a notice of default. If they're really stubborn, the time the sheriff goes out there and levies the writ of execution and gets them out of the property, then you've got to get their personal property out. That's all dictated by law too. So what that means for the seller is that the seller is sitting there with a house they want to get back on the market as soon as possible. They've got a buyer, tenant that's in there being stubborn, and they've got to go through this long, arduous process to get this guy or girl out of the property before they can even move forward. It's just a risk that's one of the risks of these lease purchases that's just out there. And despite the seller wanting to be hands-off and not a landlord, they're going to be a landlord. Landlord default. Let's see here. Landlord default. So what happens if the landlord doesn't perform under the term of the lease? Well, the tenant's just entitled to a refund of that deposit fee. So for some reason the landlord defaults, he gets that fee back. Again, that's a non-refundable fee. It's spent probably, so they might have to sue in small claims court for that, but a lot of times it'll just come right back to the tenant. Let's see here. All right, personal property of the landlord left in on the property during the term of the lease. What you want to make sure if you're representing the seller on this, the landlord, is anytime the tenant, it might be a situation where the kitchen has some old appliances in there, and the tenant who's gung-ho about this thing, and he's going to purchase this thing in a year, wants to rip those out and put in stainless steel appliances, which is fine. But you want to make sure that any sort of thing that's going to be removed, any personal property of the landlord, just get the written consent of the seller. You don't want surprises if this thing falls apart. You don't want to go into the house and just be mortified at what the buyer has done to it. Let's see here. All right, eminent domain and casualties. This is basically the situation when the house is struck by lightning and burns to the ground. What do? You look to the insurance companies. The first is the landlord's insurance requirements. The landlord needs to talk to their insurance agent and get, and I think I'm not an insurance guy, but I think it's an endorsement of the landlord's policy on that. And the problem with that, not necessarily a problem, but whenever there's a change in insurance, the seller's bank, if they have a mortgage on the property, is going to be notified, which usually isn't a problem unless your seller bought that property on a Friday and then got a tenant in the next Wednesday and used that as its primary residence. That's called mortgage fraud. You can't do that. So make sure that your seller makes that call to his mortgage company and says, "Is this going to be a problem?" It's usually not.